Learning how to properly balance and mix the mid-range is really what separates an amateur production from a professional one. So in this video, we'll cover all the key areas you need to know to help fix your muddy mixers. But before we start, if you want to get your mixers to sound like professional songs, check out the Sage Audio membership. As a member, I have to say it's an incredible value. Just for signing up, you receive 50 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, direct one-to-one mentorship that's tailored towards your specific mixing needs, unlimited mixing feedback to help improve your mixers, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses. But more on that at the end of the video. So let's first define what we mean by a muddy sounding mix. This can be a somewhat subjectively used term, but normally engineers are referring to the mid-range, or more specifically the lower mid-range, so from about 200 to 500 Hz, roughly speaking. So you know the area in general to target, but why does this one spot cause so many problems? Well, build-ups in the mid-range are very common because so many instruments that are typically used across multiple genres like bass, guitar, vocals, and so on, all have frequency overlap in that specific area, meaning that the more layers you have, the more likely you are to encounter this issue. I think the best way to start off is to first listen to a muddy sounding mix, and then we'll take things apart piece by piece, identifying the flaws, and then refine each element until we achieve a polished, clear sound. So that to me is a pretty typical sounding, muddy, unprocessed mix. All the elements are there, but everything sounds undefined and lacks the clarity you'd expect to hear as a listener. The section we're going to be looking at is made up of 4 main instrument groups, those being drums, bass, rhythm guitars, and lead guitars. Let's start off with the drums, as this is going to have the biggest impact on the overall sound of the mix. This is what they sound like currently, without any processing. You can hear it's a decent sounding recording, it's just that there's a lot of muddy frequencies that we need to clean up to help define each kit piece so they stand out in the full mix. Starting with the kick, I was given 2 tracks for this, one is the main kick sound and the other is a sub kick. I've also added a printed kick sample, which I'll talk about in a minute. The main focus is the first kick track. A trick I like to use before applying EQ is to first listen to the sound and then describe this to myself in my head, which then often helps me figure out what EQ moves to make. So I'll let you try this for yourself by first playing the kick in solo, and then I want you to describe the sound to yourself. Let me know if you heard something similar to what I did. To me, I describe this as a boxy sounding kick. It has that basketball sounding slap to it, which I'm personally not a big fan of, and the bulk of the issues I'm hearing lie within that muddy mid-range. Bringing up my EQ, you can see what I've just described is reflected in the moves I've made. I've got this high pass filter on to remove some of the unwanted sub information. Remember, I've also got a dedicated kick subtrack too, so we don't need a great deal of this on the main kick track. Then I've got 4 cuts to the mid-range, ranging from about -2 to -5 dB, going from about 250 Hz all the way up to just under 1 kHz. There was also this weird ringing frequency that I think was coming from some of the cymbal bleed, so that's what this tight bell cut is removing, along with a high shelf boost to add in some top end. Separately from my EQ, I've also saturated the upper range of the kick using this multi-band saturator, which is helping to bring out a little more click definition. I'll play this track with and without these 2 plugins so you can hear the difference. And like I said, I also had this kick subtrack, which I didn't do too much processing to. I just filtered out most of the high end as it had this odd clicky sound that wasn't meshing well with my main kick, and then a high pass filter to remove any low end rumble. After this, I felt like the kick in general lacked weight I needed for it to punch through the mix, so I added this kick sample too. I'll play all 3 tracks together so you can hear the before and after. I'll repeat the same process as before with the snare drum, so I'll let you hear it first, try to describe the sound to yourself, and then let that inform your potential mixing decisions. To me, this was another boxy and slightly muffled sounding track. It also has this airy quality to the upper mid-range, which I didn't really like the sound of. So once again, you can see these ideas reflected in my EQ moves. I felt like the body of the snare was too thin, so this low shelf is helping to add a bit of oomph around the fundamental. The high pass is just removing some of the kick bleed, whilst these 3 cuts are targeting the areas I just mentioned. The first 2 are removing that boxy muffled sound, whilst the third cut is removing a bit of that distracting airy sound which is coming from the cymbal bleed. For the full mix, I also sample enhanced the snare drum as it sounded too pokey within context, but for now I'll just play you the before and after of the close mic snare. And then the last part of the drum kit that is heavily affecting the sound is coming from these 2 overhead tracks. The EQ is pretty simple here. I don't personally like having too much low end in my overheads, as I prefer to leave this for the individual close mics and or the room mics. So in this case, I've added a high pass filter to remove most of the kick sound, along with a slight dip around 680 Hz and a gentle roll off around the top end to deal with those harsher frequencies in the cymbals. I'll play you the full drum mix, samples included, so you can hear the before and after. Moving on to the bass, here's our starting sound. I like the sound of this overall, but I'd say it has a kind of murky sounding mid-range that I can definitely see fighting with the guitars once we bring them in. I'd rather leave most of this range for the guitars and keep the bass focused on the low end. To do this, I've done similar moves to that of the kick drum EQ. I've got both a high and low pass filter to help focus the sound of the bass a bit more, and the most important part of this are these 3 mid-range cuts, which are helping to remove a lot of that murky, muddy sound I mentioned earlier. These range from about 250 Hz up to 700 Hz. Over the years, I found that I often do this 3-cut pattern in the mid-range on most low-end focused instruments. Basses can vary quite a lot in the mid-range too, depending on the style. Whether you're mixing a P bass, jazz, Sterling, etc. All of these can have drastically different sounding mid-ranges, so that's something to look out for. I'll play this along with a kick drum so you can hear how it's really helping to unmask the frequency overlap between these 2 instruments. Then last up we had the guitars. As these are the most mid-range focused instruments in the mix, I tried to keep as much of this in the tracks as possible without it sounding overbearing. I'll let you listen to the unprocessed version first, and again repeat the same process as before. So to me, these tracks are really dark sounding. There's a bit too much low end and they lack a lot of definition. The mid-range actually sounds pretty good to my ear though, and I think with some added brightness, they won't need a huge amount of work in this area to make them sit properly in the mix. Looking at my EQ, you can see I've again reflected these ideas in my EQ moves. The low shelf and high pass filter are both helping to remove some of that darkness and focus the sound of the guitar. I have cut a small amount of the upper mid-range, but these are quite subtle, and then I've added a very broad high shelf that is helping to brighten up these guitars so they cut through the mix. I have 2 tracks here, a left and right guitar using the same tone. I've just copied the same EQ over to the second track as well. Sometimes it can be nice to contrast your EQ choices when dealing with the same tone on either side, but in this case I preferred them being the same. As for the lead guitars, I've kept this super simple and removed a lot of the low end, which I often do when dealing with riffy style guitar parts. As it's playing further up on the fretboard, you don't really need a great deal of low end out of these tracks, and they'll often eat into the low end of the rhythm tracks anyway. I've also dipped out a little around 350 Hz, so let's take a listen to the before and after of both the rhythm and lead guitars played together. Now we've broken down each section, let's take one final listen to the before and after so you can hear what a big difference removing unwanted mud in your tracks can have on the overall mix. And just keep in mind that this isn't the final mix, it's just an A/B of the corrective EQ moves I've just walked you through. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, check out the Sage Audio membership. As a member, I have to say it's an incredible value. Just for signing up, you receive 50 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, direct one-to-one mentorship that's tailored towards your specific needs, unlimited mixing feedback to help improve your mixes, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses. Your dedicated mastering engineer will own your sound and craft masters specific to your preferences, and you also get unlimited revisions to ensure every master sounds exactly how you want. The one-to-one mentorship gives you personalized mixing guidance tailored towards your specific needs. Get all your questions answered with fast communication and receive unlimited advanced mixing feedback and suggestions for improvement. Coupled with the one-to-one mentorship, you also get access to Sage Audio University, where you'll find their in-depth mixing and mastering courses, walkthrough sessions for multiple genres, multi-track project files for hands-on practice, and a Sage Audio certification document for completing the courses. Additionally, you'll also be able to enter their mixing and mastering competitions to win prizes while growing your skills alongside a tight-knit group of audio engineers. Inside the membership, you'll have access to the Sage Audio community, which is full of passionate producers and engineers ready to have meaningful discussions, network, and collaborate. The membership also includes over 70 gigabytes of downloadable content, including mixing and mastering chains, multi-tracks for mixing practice, recommended free plugins, recommended paid plugins, and plugin presets. Furthermore, you'll get direct access to their full catalogue of 700 plus in-depth mixing and mastering videos specifically created to help you improve every aspect of your mixes. Every day, I see great wins in the membership from producers and engineers noticing a massive improvement in their mixes after joining. Use the link in the description today to join the Sage Audio membership with a 70% discount and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.